All right, today on the Second Chance podcast, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Danny Brassell, known to many as the Jim Carrey with a PhD. Danny is a global sought after speaker, trainer, and coach who has captivated over 3,500 audiences and authored 17 books, including Leadership Begins with Motivation. As the co founder of the world's leading reading engagement program, he's on a mission to bring joy back to education and the workplace. Danny's own journey of resilience from losing everything in a real estate scam to reinventing himself during the pandemic proves that success is in the reps. Let's dive in, see how he's helping others craft their own chances. Welcome, Danny.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. Thanks for all that you do to spread some joy and some really needed information and inspiration to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. I enjoy the conversations, man. I'm born a people guy, so I just enjoy getting to know folks, and I had pushed back on podcasting for a long time until some friends were like, as much as you like, you don't never meet a stranger, so it just makes it really easy for me to connect and learn more about folks like yourself who are passionate about what they do. And man, it was neat just kind of reading up on you and all the things, and you have some very focused things that I hope we have time to get to. But just reading about you, you described a couple second chance moments in your life, from losing everything in a real estate scam to losing 100 gigs during COVID. What mindset or strategies helped you not just bounce back, but thrive during those situations?
Well, I'm a positive person, Jeff. I think you and I are very similar in that respect. Things happen. We just got to move on. You know, and God closes one door, opens another one. It's usually a better door. I mean, I was a teacher and I wanted to make some more money for my family, and so in 2005 my wife and I attended a real estate seminar which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could focus on all the negatives, but I'm a positive person. I
Yeah.
mean, first of all, my wife's my soulmate. I put her through the ringer and she stuck by me. Second of all, I no longer view money as important as I used to, because I realized you can lose it in a second like that. Third, I try not to judge other people, because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would have said, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you don't really know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to admit, but the more I read the Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And then finally, I didn't want to declare bankruptcy. I eventually had to, because of a state called North Cuba, also known as Florida. But what my accountant said is, in order to avoid bankruptcy, you have to make this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side as a side hustle, and I hit the number he gave me. Well, the next year, Jeff, he gave me a much higher number. Well, I hit that number right on the number. And so in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I successfully built up a speaking business that far exceeded my income as an educator. Well, then, like you said, in 2020, everybody had the global pandemic occur. I remember I remember exactly when it happened. I was supposed to speak in Orange County, California. I was watching a basketball game, and it said that I think it was the New Orleans basketball game had been canceled. I'm like, canceled? It's a basketball game. Why would you cancel a basketball game? And as I was thinking that, the announcer said, why would they cancel a basketball game? And then it comes out like an hour later that Rudy Gobert for the Salt Lake City Jazz, Utah Jazz, has COVID. And an hour later, they closed down the NBA. An hour after that, they closed down the NHL. An hour after that, CNN saying Tom Hanks has it in Australia. And it was about 11:30 at night, and the conference organizer called me up. And I said, I bet you're calling me to tell me you have twice as many people coming tomorrow as you thought. And he's like, gosh, Danny, I'm sorry to tell you this. We got to cancel. I'm like, dude, what are you supposed to do? I get it. And overnight, I lost all my gigs booked for the next couple of years. And so I had to make another pivot, which people have wanted me to coach them forever in speaking. And I've never wanted to do that, Jeff, because I have a very high standard for my students. I'm not going to get off your back until you succeed. And some people don't like to do the work, and I hate having to push people, but I do push them. And I've actually had so much joy in working with people. I mean, I work with, Olympic gold medalists and politicians and famous actors and pastors, but the people I get the most joy out of working with are just ordinary people like you and me, entrepreneurs trying to get more clients, expand their businesses, make a better home for their families. I love it. So that's a very long answer to your short question, Jeff.
No, you spot on, man. When you talk about too being around some high performers, you don't realize how ordinary they
Yeah.
are as well. We put a lot of folks up on, but they have their own isms or have their own negative self doubts or whatever. They're looking for folks like Dr. Danny that can help them along the same thing. So I kind of just when I tell people that after you get to work around or be around that, it's just there's a different
Mm-hmm.
mindset because they're driven to win or driven at a higher level. Just for looking for their own success, but they shop at Walmart or there's not a lot of difference sometimes when we classify those
Yeah.
folks.
Well, and the
That's
real difference, Jeff, was what you were kind of alluding to. What makes them successful is they seek out coaches. They seek out ways to
yeah,
improve themselves, and that's where you see. And then they listen to it. I never
yeah,
understand a person that pays me a lot of money to give them my expertise, and then they don't take it. I'm like, well, why'd you? If you look at the highest performers, you look at Tiger Woods, greatest golfer in history. He has a putting coach, he has a long distance driving coach, he has a short game coach, he has a psychological coach. Maybe he should have invested in a relationship coach, but that's what the most successful people do is they get coaching. And same thing with me. I mean, I have an AI coach right now. I'm trying to learn all this AI. I have marketing coaches. So it's something. And the other thing you said, Jeff, which I loved, is they're ordinary people just like you and me. They have the same desires and fears, and some of them have insecurities you would never think that they had. So it's good to know that they put on their pants the same way you and I do.
yeah, yeah. That's how did to take me back just briefly here, in your school stuff, and so we're working inner city school, and that kind of you got this a lot of your drive just came from the urge to go and make more money for your
Yep.
family. Is that did I yeah, that's um what was there a defining moment or something that kind of was like I got to go do this? Like, for me, I'll
Yeah.
insert myself like kids, just extra needing extra income can be a big deal. It may come from just growing your family.
Yeah, life is all about those pivots, Jeff. I know you know that. I was a teacher in South Central Los Angeles, and I loved what I did. I mean, I loved the kids. I liked most of their parents, but I couldn't stand the bureaucracy. And I remember the
Yeah,
day that I had to resign. I had a parent conference with a wonderful a mother of one of my favorite students of all time. Jonathan was his name, and Jonathan was gifted and talented. And Jonathan's mother asked me a question I was not prepared to answer. She looked at me and she said, Miss Brassell, Jonathan looks at you like a father. If you were his daddy, what would you recommend that I do? And the word that came out of my mouth was move, because her son was gifted and talented, and my school district did not have a gifted and talented program. And I knew if
yeah,
Jonathan stayed at my school, he was getting Miss Hampton next year, and she was going to destroy this young man because Miss Hampton was a direct descendant of Darth Vader. And I realized if that's what I truly believe, I need to resign, which I did that year. I wound up finishing the year, but that was it for me in the classroom. And I went into a deep funk, wound up taking a position at the university, started teaching teachers and administrators. And I really enjoyed that. I started doing research and speaking at conferences for the university, but it was the same type of thing. Education is just bogged down with a lot of bureaucracy, and I have a mouth, and
yeah,
my is the same thing as I used to argue this at school meetings. I'm like, if the answer to my question is not because that's what's best for this kid, why are we doing it? I mean, it's really easy to blanket things and create these visionary statements for everybody, but everybody's different. And that's the strategy, is how do I fit my teaching to, how do I adapt to the needs of every single student. It's the same thing as a coach. Everybody I coach is a little bit different. They have different strengths, and we have to identify those. I mean, yeah, they have weaknesses. I'm not a weakness guy. I'm looking at your strengths and figuring out how do we take that strength and put it to your advantage.
And you talk a lot about success being in the reps. You got a story from just like your earlier days when you got into coaching where putting in the reps really paid off? Um,
Yeah, you're
and a lesson that may a breakthrough moment or whatever that might look
Yeah,
like.
I've been blessed with lots of wonderful mentors, Jeff. One of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push ups. Translation, you got to do the work. I mean, I guarantee you, Jeff,
Yeah,
your first podcast stunk. And the second one you
yeah,
did stunk, but it stunk a little bit less than the first one. And now you're an old pro and you're seasoned, no problem. This just flows with no problem. It's like anything. You need to get the reps in. So when I'm working with people on speaking, I say, well, there's two ways to get better at speaking. First of all, you got to do the reps. I mean, you should be speaking to service organizations, Lions Club, Optimist Club, Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club. You should be speaking to schools. You should be speaking to churches and temples and synagogues, to the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, heck, I had a guy, Jason, 3 years ago. He's one of my favorites of all time. Jason, he said, well, he had no audience. He had no audience whatsoever. I'm like, all right, Jason, if you're going to be difficult, do you have a Facebook account? He's like, yes. I'm like, go on Facebook Live tomorrow. I want you to deliver your talk. And so he, unlike a lot of people, he did it, Jeff. And I was so proud of him. He went on, and one woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally watched him, and he stunk. And then the next day, he did the exact same speech, but this time 3 people showed up, and he stunk, but he stunk a little bit less than the first time. Well, fast forward now, 3 years later, he has over 6,000 people in his tribe now, and he made almost 7 figures last year. And he delivers the same talk again and again. It's all in the reps. He's built up so much confidence. I mean, the same thing. I had a guy, Gustavo, 18 months ago. Gustavo should be president of the United States. He's one of my favorite people ever. Gustavo came to America, Jeff, like 30 years ago from Ecuador. Didn't speak a word of English, did every menial job that nobody ever wanted to do, invested every dime in real estate. Well, 30 years later, he's worth like 30 or $40 million. And so we were working on his speech, and I told him exactly what I just told you. I'm like, hey, you got to do reps. And he said, well, I'm going on a podcast tonight. And so here's his offer. His offer is he has a 4-month real estate coaching program for $40,000. Jeff, I craft a lot of offers. That's a very high ticket offer to be asking an
yeah.
audience. But I said, hey, you got to make the offer tonight on the podcast. Here's my phone number. Call me up tomorrow, Gustavo. He calls me up the next day, Jeff. He's so excited. He's like, Danny, you're a genius. I'm like, did you go on the podcast? He's like, yes. Did you make the offer? He's like, yes. I'm like, did you sell any? He's like, 23. Jeff, reading's my specialty, not math. But if I'm doing my math correctly, he made
Yeah,
$920,000 that night on an
yeah,
offer we had crafted that afternoon. Since then, he's made 8 figures off of that. And again, I mean, first of all, I should be getting a cut from now on, I think. But what's more important, what I love about Gustavo is he did it. Most people don't
yeah,
put themselves. I mean, it's like all these people that they talk about doing a podcast. You did a podcast, Jeff. I mean, you actually did something. I want to be around people that do something. My
yeah.
grandfather used to have a great saying. He'd always say, there are thems that does and thems that talks, and thems that does gives thems that talks something to talks about. I think he's absolutely right. There's doers and there's talkers. Be a doer.
And you're spot on. I enjoy speaking, and I carry a little accent, so a little for me is podcasting helps me get feedback on my sound, my
Mhm.
tones, my conversation. It helps me learn. I struggle with just enunciating my words.
Mhm.
For years, my buddy Zach, he'd be like, "You mumble all the time." He'd come back. This is all we ever hear when you walk in a room. We hear. So just podcasting too really helped me just dial in. I did Toastmasters.
Mhm.
If you want to have, if you and I tell this on my podcast a lot, Toastmasters is good, but it's very it's serious. open mic nights for comedy.
Mm.
Oh, they're so good. You can, it's just, sometimes don't test your emotional material. You don't want to get a tear jerking moment in comedy. I did that the last time I went up. So I, yeah, reps is a big deal. And whether you're on a, like you said, you don't have to, you're not in front of 10,000 people.
Mhm.
Go talk in front of your kids' class. Talk about career day, or yeah, just figure that out.
Low risk, high
Um,
reward. And I love that you're doing comedy. I mean, that's what one of the things I tell people. I'm a little bit different than a lot of these coaches. A lot of coaches will say, "Oh, we want you to talk about your most depressing story." Now, there's three reasons why I don't teach people to do that, Jeff. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need another sad story. I think we need stories of hope. Second of all, when I'm working with people, primarily entrepreneurs, I'm helping them craft a presentation that they're going to deliver again and again to introduce themselves to new audiences so that they can acquire more clients. So, like in politics, they would call this a stump speech. In superhero movies, it's your origin story. Simon Sinek in his book Start with Why would probably call this your visionary statement. This is, you can call it peanut butter and jelly, it doesn't matter. How do you introduce? I call it the well-crafted story. Um, how do you introduce yourself to new audiences so that they want to take that second date with you, that they want to accept your offer, whether it's an unpaid offer like sign up for my newsletter, or book a phone call with me, or a paid offer, buy my product, or invest in my coaching program. I only judge your results one way: are people going to take the next step with you? That's, we're going to maximize that audience. And so when I see these people that do these sad talks, I'm like, do you really want to do that talk again and again, talking about the loss of a child or something tragic that I don't know how people do that. And third, this is where people get angry with me, Jeff. I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I can tell the same joke again and again. I think there's something admirable about my objective, which is to get you to smile. I believe that these people that tell that same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they've told it, now those are crocodile tears, and now you're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I, for one, don't want to have to take a shower after I speak because I just manipulated my audience. And so I love that you said that, because, I tell people there's two ways you get better at speaking. First of all, you got to do your reps. Second of all, watch lots of speakers. I mean, I
yeah,
watch I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch politicians. I watch televangelists. I watch comedians. I love that. You were talking about being a little bit self conscious of your accent, but that's what makes you spicy. You've got
yeah,
flavor about that. I mean, when I lived in California, we had a governor with a pretty thick accent named Arnold Schwarzenegger. He did pretty well for
yeah,
himself. I mean, if you watch comedians, they're actually the best at this. It's one of the first strategies I share with people when you're speaking. So this is for your audience right now. Don't share your successes, share your weaknesses and your
yeah,
failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you talk about your own failures, they're going to really connect with you and love you for that. I mean, and comedians are one of my favorite crowds. I mean, you talk about your accent, you sound a lot like Nate Bargatze's a funny comedian. He doesn't run away from his accent. If you watch comedians, they're smart about this. So Kevin Hart is a little black guy, and so he makes a lot of jokes about being a little black guy. Jim Gaffigan's a big fat white guy, so he makes jokes about being a big fat white guy. When you turn your weakness into your strength, nobody can defeat you. And it's really
yeah.
powerful. So I absolutely love that you get, and I don't mean to denigrate Toastmasters either. I think they're providing a great
No, yeah,
service for people, but I completely agree with you. It's a little bit stiff in what they're training you how to do. We have to go past some of those fundamentals and really start to mold you into who you are. So I love that advice. Go up for an open mic night, whether it's comedy or poetry or whatever. I love
yeah.
that.
It's yeah. I think and folks don't. What Dr. Danny's hitting on here right now is don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. And I think if you want to listen to, if you can do podcast. When I'm working with someone and they're just trying to, like, sometimes they want to start in social media. Like, Jeff, how do you get all this stuff out on social media? Or, and I tell them, like, and they're like uncomfortable. And I go, listen, I don't want to bust your bubble, but your first 20 to 50, maybe even more stories and reels, nobody's going to see it. So go, and what you said, is just go get your, go log time and go do a story. They disappear in 24 hours. No one's going, I'm telling you, no one's going to see that, that is outside of your really close friends network that's encouraging you to do this. And there's always that uncomfort for people that do that. Where I started getting more confidence in podcasting was some of the guests that come through, they're from Europe, they're from Australia, and like we're just having this mashup of who's in the, just our accents and how we all talk. So don't let these little nuggets that have been placed in your head over the years become a roadblock that keeps you from taking that next step. I did that for too long. And I'm fortunate to find podcasting and folks like you, Danny, that come on and really help reinforce those things that we're talking about. You're also in this on this mission to bring back joy to education and the workplace. How do you approach this with people who feel stuck and unmotivated?
Well, I mean, all of us are unmotivated at some point. I always tell people resolutions fail, routines are what work. You just have to get yourself in routines that are going to eliminate that negativity. I mean, I was watching a horrible show on TV last week called The News, and it put me in a totally depressed state. I tell people, stop watching the news. I can promise you, whatever presidential candidate you care about, they don't even know who you are. So stop putting so much of
Mm-mm.
your I just don't understand why people put so much into this. Is actually, I'm a sports fan, and I live and die with my teams, and I'm like, but they don't even know who I am. Why am I getting so upset about this? Life's too
Yeah.
short. We need to laugh a lot more. That's why I loved when I was teaching kindergarten. I used to tell my kindergartners, I'm like, hey kids, you got the rest of your lives to be miserable. This year we're laughing. Average adults laugh 15 times a day. Average kindergartners laugh 300 times a day. Your job is to make me laugh 315 times every day. And they're like, whoa, so they tell silly things. Getting to the question, which is how do you motivate people? Well, first of all, stop watching the news, whatever news you're watching, because it's not going to serve you. Listen to a podcast like this podcast. I'm preaching to the choir right now. I love podcasts. I'm learning all the time. Plus, I love that I can put them on 1.5 times speed and 2 times speed. I didn't know I
Yep.
could process information that quickly. I read books all the time. I mean, I'm Mr. Reader. I work with people that say they have no time to read. I'm like, yeah, well, it's time to read after you watch the game on TV, have a couple of beers, go out shopping. I mean, life is not about time, it's about priorities. What do you want to prioritize? And you need to be conscious about this. And so those people that are unmotivated out there, I would say surround yourself with people that lift you up and read books that are also going to give you positive things. I mean, one of my mentors was Charlie Tremendous Jones, and he used to say, you're the same today as you will be in 5 years, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the people listening right now, you're on the right path if you are unmotivated, because this show hopefully is going to motivate you. I'll motivate you. I'll give you a pep talk every day.
Yeah. You hit it there with just how you really, and folks don't do this enough. You got to guard what you let in. And it used to be the new, you flip through the paper, whatever, and I remember growing up, we had at one of my workplaces, we had the news played in the background because it was one of the things they would let us have, and the news somewhere along the lines evolved into this machine of there's never anything that we quit watching TV probably in 2010, 2012.
Right.
I cut that off, consume like you do. I enjoy, uh, Audible and podcasting. And if you're trying to figure out something, you can go to YouTube. And what we don't realize is, if we're not careful, we get locked into this woe is me world, one side of it, and the other side, Danny, is when you have if you're really, really wrapped into sports, those folks have reached their goals. Um, so I try to educate my athletes that I work with on that. I'm like it's okay to watch that, but don't get so consumed by it because they're already watching their goals, and it's crazy how much time. Um, I used to when I coach more directly at the gym, and I would have someone be like, I'm like, hey, you really ought to think about foam rolling, and just spend a few extra little longer on your legs just for some movement stuff. You got some, you need to lose something, or I just don't have time to do that, Jeff. And I would always lean into, I mean, do you watch Netflix? Like, oh yeah, I got my show. We watch this every night. I said, no, I'm like, well, why are you watching your show? Why don't you do some foam rolling then? And it was like this eye-opening moment of, wait a minute, I can do two things at once, and um, so it's crazy how we let ourselves get overwhelmed by everyone else's pursuits and versus our
I
own.
love what you're saying, Jeff, because nothing you're suggesting is too complicated. People go for these complicated things. I'm like, it's the little things. It's the little things that you do that
Yeah.
make the difference. And so if you can just implement some of these little, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot if you take a walk every day for 15 minutes. You're not going to see any
Yeah.
results in a week, but in a year, yeah, you're going to see results. You're going to feel, and you're getting outside that oxygen. Even if you're inside, at least maybe you can socialize. I mean, that's what I do. I do thought walks every day. And so I put on your podcast while I'm walking, and I'm like, okay, this is something positive while I'm walking around, or I'll listen to, I'm a bad Christian. I'm trying to learn the Bible. So I go through the Bible. Sometimes it's boring to read. So I'll just let it be read to me. Um, but I see all these people wasting their time. I mean, you watch TLC, which I call the loser channel. It's about all these people with screwed up problems. I'm like, I swear the only reason people watch those shows is because it makes them feel better about themselves. Well, I'm not screwed up by that,
Yeah.
like that. I'm like, well, if you're going to always compare yourself to the lowest common denominator, that's great. But I mean, I like to push myself. Let's push ourselves a little bit more.
You've also you have helped countless entrepreneurs and leaders with their communication and improving those communication skills. Do you have that one tip or trick that can make an immediate impact for someone who's trying to connect with their audience?
Well, I only give tips to waiters, Jeff, but I'll give strategies to your audience. And so
Man, I love it.
here's a good exercise for everybody to do tonight: is sit down in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper, a libation of choice beside you, and for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story; I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in just an hour, you'll come up with like 400 or 500 of these stories. That's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then you need to figure out, well, what's this really a story about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about being loyal to people. Oh, this is a story of trustworthiness. I mean, if you go on my computer, I literally have tens of thousands of stories like these. And so whenever I'm speaking at an event, I just need to figure out what are the things that I want my audience to do. And I just have to find the story that fits that audience. And I've always said that, when I work with big people, I mean, I got a guy right now, he's crazy. I mean, he's climbed the highest peak on all 7 continents. He's done the Iditarod, he's swam with sharks in Madagascar. And I look at him like, nobody can relate to you. Nobody's done that. I said, the stories that matter the most is everybody peed their pants in first grade. That's a story that you're going to get nods from your audience. And that's what you want to watch. Too many speakers, they're just watching the speaker. I always say, watch your audience. When you see people leaning in and nodding, that means you're actually connecting with them. So I worked with a Richard, very successful financial planner about a month ago. And Richard, he started his talk. He'd say, oh, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've made over $1 billion for my clients. I've worked with these famous people, yada, yada, yada. And I said, Richard, what are the three most important parts of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right that you're bragging, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation. The beginning of your presentation is to connect with your audience. And so we redid his speech. And so now he starts off where he's talking about the first client he ever got, which took him forever, and he made every single mistake possible. And it's a comedy of errors. And Richard, literally 2 weeks later, Jeff, he's like, Danny, you're a genius. He does these little dinner seminars like at a steakhouse for like 15 couples to invest their portfolios with him. And he said that he noticed right away that the guys usually have their arms folded across their chests and like they're wondering, what's this guy trying to sell me? And now they're tapping their knees, they're laughing so hard at his story. Now he's connected with them. And so then we put
Yeah.
his credentials, we put them towards the end of his speech. There's when I'm working with people, I say, well, you have to understand there's two types of people in your audience, and most people only cater to one, and that's a big mistake because you're leaving money on the table. So I call them the Joe Fridays and the Julia Roberts. And so we'll be stereotypical and say it's a married couple. The guy is usually Joe Friday with his arms across his chest, looking skeptical. This is a guy who wants just the facts. How long is this going to take me? How much is it going to cost? What am I going to get out of it? What do you need me to do? You have to make sure to address those things. And that's what Richard did when he was talking about his credentials and what he does for a living. So that's your Joe Friday. But your Julia Roberts is like the wife in the couple. Again, this is a stereotype, but this is what I find. So this is a person that makes their decisions based on emotional needs. Oh, I love listening to Jeff. I don't even know what he's selling, but he makes me feel good about myself. He makes me laugh. I really love him. And so this is where you have to have the inspiration, gymnastics, they call it stick the landing at the end. How do you land the plane? And the way you do that is by connecting to both of those types of people. If you do that, you're going to see your sales rate go up exponentially. And that's what I love watching people do, is when they just rework things. I mean, I worked with I'm not going to say his name. He has a very difficult name. He's an Indian engineer in Silicon Valley, and he was giving a presentation to, well, I won't say the company, a very large tech company. And he was like, Danny, you need to make me funny. I'm not very funny. I'm very information oriented, and so let me try and think of a name. He has a very difficult name. His name's like
Yeah.
Shabunakar Abudala. And so all we did, Jeff, is we just changed the beginning of his presentation. Now he says, hello, my name is Shabundukar Abadala. And he pauses. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what it does, you don't need to be a stand-up comedian. All you're trying to do is to get people to smile like, oh, this guy doesn't take himself too seriously. Because too many people take themselves seriously. I'm like, you ain't, I mean, I used to teach kindergarten. You need to be, if you need some humility, teach kindergarten. I had a little girl one day, LaShonda, she raises her hand. She's like, Miss Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShonda. I ain't all that. And I think people like to be around people that's why, I mean, I love the show I Love Lucy. Who doesn't love Lucy? Lucy's great because she's a nitwit. She's making mistakes all the time, and all of us make those mistakes. And she makes us feel good about ourselves because, oh, she's just like me. That's what you're trying to do. I always make fun of politicians and motivational speakers. Jeff, have you ever noticed none of them ever grew up middle class? They all grew up poor in a log cabin or what. I'm like, really? I don't think you're
Yeah.
telling the truth there, but they want to show, oh, I'm just like you.
Relatability is a big
It
deal.
is.
I always like to ask if I'm speaking or presenting. Workshops is pretty cut and dry, you know that. Yeah. But if you're going to speak in if the Lions or whatever, a good tool to use is when I'm done. When I'm done speaking, what would you have want the audience to take away? How do you want them to
Yeah.
feel? And that's a really great way when you're coordinating your speaking or whatever. Just a tip that I had someone that gave me over the years, and it's really helpful. That way, you're being mindful of what your folks that are having you there are looking for. You were touching on a lot of your stuff on just some of the tips you give, but you keep all of this stuff in your well crafted story workshops. And that's basically where we're helping people land more clients through speaking. And you gave a really good nugget of, of a really great strategy, not a tip, a really great strategy that in a couple there that folks could use. But do you have another key principle
Of
inside
course.
of your workshop that anyone could use to tell a more compelling
Yeah,
story?
so this isn't just mine. So my co-founder is Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson. I call us the professor and the poet because he was a Broadway actor and I'm an educator. So I'm Mr. Everything's based on research and he's everything's all based on feeling. So in our relationship, I'm the Joe Friday and he's the Julia Roberts. So we basically train people. It's our 5 C's. So before you give the speech, you need clarity. The beginning of your speech, you need to connect with your audience. Then you get into teaching the content of your presentation. Then you have a call to action, and then finally, you close your presentation. And so, what's really important this is going to sound crazy, but clarity is key. Before we
Yeah.
work with people, there are 2 questions you have to answer, and it's amazing. I work with a lot of seasoned professionals, and they cannot answer these questions. Here are the 2 questions: who is your audience and what is the problem that you solve? If you cannot
Yeah.
clearly enunciate what those answers are, then you're in trouble. If you can, you're in pretty good shape. Another thing, and you were kind of alluding to it, which is very important to me. I see this mistake all the time. You only want, and there's lots of research. Robert Cialdini, his book Influence is one of my favorite books for the psychology of persuasion. I think it's fantastic because he's ethically driven. He says don't do business with people unless it's a win-win for everybody has to win. I love that. There's
You're right.
there's a lack of integrity in a lot of these people, and Cialdini has nothing but integrity. But his research support, it's not just his research, there's lots of research to support this, that people don't like choices. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see in presentations is, hey, if you like what I'm saying, here's my Facebook account. Oh, here's my LinkedIn. You can also email me. You just gave the person 3 different calls to action right there. They're confused. And guess what? They're not going to do any of them. You need to give them one thing. What's the one thing you want your audience to do? Now,
Yeah.
like a lot of people, like I work with people, they can't pitch from the stage. I'm like, that's fine. Book a free phone call. You can pitch them on the phone call, but your call to action right now is book the free phone call. We need to get that person, or we need to get their name on our list, our email list, and then we can give them all kinds of great service, and then make the sale that way. But most people, they have tons of different calls to action, and it just confuses their audience. And so again, for clarity purposes, you need to know who your audience is. And a big mistake a lot of people make on this is they think they talk to everybody. And I'm like, well, if you're
Yeah.
speaking to
I
everybody,
was
you're
going
not
to ask you.
speaking to anybody. I mean, like
Yeah.
most of the people listening to your podcast, Jeff, these are people, a lot of entrepreneurs. You're not
Yeah.
talking. I mean, that's what you should be doing. Like, and you can niche it down even more than. I worked with a woman a couple of months ago. She was amazing, Jeff. Her niche is she sells horses to professional polo players, or not horses, saddles, the saddles to these. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's an incredible. She makes like 800,000 a year selling saddles to professional polo players. I'm like, my gosh, what am I doing with my life? That's an incredible niche. Niche it down. And your niche can grow as you grow. But like, so for
Yep.
example, when I first started out as a speaker, I spoke to teachers. Why? Because I had been a teacher. And then I started speaking to parents because I'm like, okay, well, I'm comfortable speaking to parents too. And then I started speaking to administrators because I'm comfortable with that. And then I was in a mastermind. And one of the guys in my mastermind was a very successful salesperson, and he wanted me to train his sales team. And my mindset, I said, oh, I can't train your sales team because I don't have any experience. I've just been a teacher. And his reply, Jeff, and you'll love this, he said, Danny, if you can get inner city middle school boys to read Shakespeare, I'm pretty sure you can get my sales team motivated. And what he did for me was a
Right.
huge favor. It got me expanding. Oh, it helped develop my mindset. Okay. So who is your audience, and what is the problem that you solve. A lot of people don't even know what problem they solve. I'm like, you're not going to, it's, I deal with a lot of life coaches. Now, I always hate that expression. What's a life coach? What do you do?
Yeah.
If you want a life coach, go to Starbucks, because there's 4 of them sitting there right now. Everybody's a life coach nowadays. And, the one common element I see in most life coaches is they're unemployed. I'm like, come on, you need to figure out what you do. Like, and instead of being a life coach, say I'm a faith-based coach. I'm going to help you with your faith. Or I'm a family coach. I help you get your family right. That's great. That's a better niche. Or, you know, um, women. I work with a lot of women, and they I always say, hey, my favorite niche are these women, Christian women's groups. And they're like, why? I'm like, 2 reasons. First of all, they gather together so I can speak to them.
Hmm.
And second of all, they talk. And if you serve them, they talk a lot, and word of mouth is the best. It's the same thing with your podcast. The way it expands is
Yeah.
because people like it, and so they start telling their buddies, hey, listen to Jeff, this was cool. When I'm in the gym lifting, I listen to the podcast, and I always feel like I'm learning while I'm lifting. I loved it. You
Yeah.
did it's a great psychological thing. It's called stacking for habits. I do the same thing. Is when I'm on my exercise bike, I watch Mad Men, and I don't allow myself to watch Mad Men unless I'm on the exercise bike. And so what I've done is I've stacked 2 habits together. I would get to watch the TV
Yeah.
show is my reward, but the reward is I get to work out at the same time. So that's what you were doing with your people. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I had the same thing, Danny, when I came out of law enforcement. I was kind of struggling to transfer the skills over, and I went into a dealership, and the guy was like, "Well, you know, we can hire you." And he asked me a couple questions. He was like, what is wrong with you?" And I'm like, what do you mean? What's wrong with me? And he goes, I said, "I don't know anything about selling." He goes, this is what he said. He goes, you've literally taught people from with guns in their hands off of ledges and all these things. If you can do all that, you can damn sure sell this 82 Buick I got sitting on the lot out here. And I was like, "You think?" He's like, "Oh, absolutely." And he gave me the confidence that I needed to really. And that's like 2007, 2008. So he really gave me that, implanted that confidence. So I enjoy those conversations. And your other thing you mentioned about niching, cannot emphasize that enough. Work with a specific group and you hit it. It can change. If you get burnt out working with that group, move on, but don't try to be all things to everyone. And I have leaned into that mistake over and over. Make it from time to time still now. And I'm trying to get something going. I'm just put it out there to everyone, and versus trying to find this group that I can work in to really get traction with it. Well, as we wrap up, how do you want folks to get in touch with you? And what do you like how do you like everyone to reach out and connect with you?
Well, as a thank you to you, Jeff, and your audience for having to listen to me, I wanted to give everybody a free blueprint on how they can create their well-crafted story. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, again, freestoryguide.com. See, I'm enunciating just like you've been practicing your enunciation. If you go to freestoryguide.com, you'll get a blueprint on how you can create your well-crafted.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Stays. Yeah, I appreciate it. I can't thank you enough. I do, and you're. I hope this is the first of many conversations you and I get to have, just because we are kind of rooted in this positive mindset. The other thing I would tell people, um, as we close up here, what Dr. Danny's talking about with this signature speech, and you can, if you can get it, and I was talking to someone and we were talking about 90s comics. Remember, like the old Def Jam guys, and they had, like, they came out and they went on tour with that same bit and the same gimmick, the same stuff. And I was talking to someone the other day, and we were name dropping, like, "Hey, you remember this guy? You remember this guy?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I saw him in Texas." He just says does the same stuff. And I goes, "Was the house packed?" He's like, "It was sold out." And I go, why change it, right? Those guys are still making money today off telling the same jokes that they did back in the 90s because people love it. So don't take for granted that when you tell something one time that the entire world has heard it, that you're just barely scratching the surface. Thank you for being here, man. I'm glad I got to meet you. I'm glad I got to know more about you and what you do. And I'm following you on all the socials, so I'm looking forward to connecting with you. And hopefully, you and I will be in the same room at some point in time, dropping some fire for people. But thank you for being on here, Donnie.